When actors, producers, cast, and crew read Phil Alden Robinson's script, titled Shoeless Joe, they felt the words on the page. But this happens. Good scripts move you. There were still no expectations when this new band of artists came together for the first time to perform a table read in the Methodist Church in Hollywood. But as they opened to the first page and began to read, something special started to happen. From Burt Lancaster to James Earl Jones to Kevin Costner, Dwyer Brown, and Marjorie Simpkin, who read for Gabby Hoffman, they began to feel the magic. As Charles Hoyes, who played the part of Swede Risberg, one of the Ghost ballplayers, recalled, by the end of the read, there was a hushed silence in the room. Everyone just sitting in this church, absorbing this spiritual experience. But the tingling that Charles Hoyes mentioned wasn't simply about what had just happened. It was also about what was to come. If it feels this way, simply reading the story around a table in a church, what would happen when the characters, fully embodied, nestled into the setting that was fated to be? There was certainly a great deal of magic in the air in Iowa when shooting Field of Dreams, but just as impressive was the creativity, the out-of-the-box thinking that allowed for the difficult and seemingly impossible shots to look so ordinary. Tonight, the film, still known as Shoeless Joe, lands in Iowa, and we step through the illusion to discuss some of the most fun and fascinating moments of movie making. For the people involved, both visitors and locals, life will never be the same at the end of this hot, dry, magical summer.
This book really should have never been written. The film should have never been made.
I sort of have this feeling that one of the reasons I was born, was to be part of this, to get this out into the culture.
What they didn't count on was the word of mouth, that people would see it and then just say, oh my God, you have to go see this movie. It ended up defying the odds.
Midnight Library of Baseball presents Season 2, The Making of Field of Dreams. I'm Ben Orlando. Sometimes the best discoveries are the answers to questions we never thought to ask. What do I mean? Well, take the Field of Dreams, the actual ball field in Iowa that was built solely for the movie in 1988, and then became a legend of its own, a landmark. The field in Dyersville has become a baseball mecca, a pilgrimage for millions. And the question that never existed for me was, could this field have been built somewhere else, in another state, in another country? But in the early stages of planning this film, these were serious questions. From production manager Brian Frankish.
I was discussing the picture with Terry Nelson, and he had said that Phil wanted to do this picture, out of town on location. I said, well, sure. I said, well, what are your thoughts? He said, well, we've researched Vancouver, British Columbia. We've researched Illinois. We've researched Kansas. We've researched Indiana. And I was taken quite a bit aback because I knew Phil really well, and I knew the guy's a writer. And excuse me, Phil's a writer. And I just turned to Terry and I says, excuse me, but how do you spell Iowa?
When Brian Frankish mentioned Phil Alden Robinson being a writer, he was talking about harmony and continuity and honoring the truth of a story. Sure, films are often set in locations different from what was written in a book or what is actually stated in the film. You might have a cast of characters supposedly living in Pennsylvania, but the film is actually shot in Vancouver. If the audience can't tell the difference, what does it matter? But Phil Alden Robinson, who loved the novel Shoeless Joe, knew that for author W.P. Kinsella, there was a special connection to Iowa. Kinsella went to school at the University of Iowa, and he fell in love with the state. As Kinsella told Cooperstown historian Tim Wiles, Iowa was a jumping-off point to so many major league ballparks, a kind of baseball nexus. More than just a name in a book and a script, Iowa was special. And after having such a deep emotional experience at the table read in the Hollywood Church, Phil Alden Robinson wanted to do all that he could to keep the magic flowing. And Brian Frankish wanted to help.
I mean, I can remember that that's all I can see when reading the screenplay is this keeps leaping out here. This is sort of a medieval fantasy that takes place in the fantastical land known as Iowa, Has anybody taken a look at that? So Phil and I sat down and we just started to put together the whole concept of what's it going to take to get Iowa in this story.
How often does reality reshape itself based on fiction? In truth, quite often, as individuals are often inspired by something they read or see or hear. Many political operatives said they were inspired by watching The West Wing. But Field of Dreams is different, and that's why this story has such long legs. The prophecy in this movie, Field of Dreams, happened in real life with the field from the movie Field of Dreams. Terrence Mann said people will come to the fictional field in Iowa, and then people in real life came to the real field in Iowa. Millions. So, considering what Brian Frankish said, there could have been a very different outcome here. The fictional field in Iowa could have been a real field in Kansas or Canada. Would people have still come? Maybe. But it would not have been the same. When Brian Frankish and Phil Alden Robinson started to ask the question, what would it take to make the movie in Iowa, they reached out to the top cinema guy in Iowa. Hi, Wendell.
Hey, Ben, how are you doing?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm doing okay.
Can you introduce yourself and just explain your role at the time?
I am Wendell Jarvis. Yeah, I was the film commissioner for Iowa. I actually founded the Iowa Film Office and ran that for nearly 20 years. And Field of Dreams was one of 59 motion pictures that I worked on. And it was still today my favorite movie that I ever had a chance to work on.
As he just stated, Jarvis was behind many films that ended up coming to Iowa, including The Bridges of Madison County. When Jarvis read the script, he was hypnotized by the magic dust, just like everyone else. He really wanted this movie to come to his state. But to make it work, he needed to find the perfect spot.
When I read a script to find locations, I read it 3 times. The first time is to understand the story. And the next time is to understand the characters that are within the story. And the third time is to visualize the locations that are going to communicate that message. Because the location is the stage that the actors perform on. So we have to find the right kind of location to communicate the message that the director wants ultimately from that film.
Jarvis vocalized what he believed would be the perfect site, and it was a volunteer at the Iowa Film Office, Sue Rydell, who then went out and tried to scout a real-life example of Jarvis's vision. From an article in the Des Moines Register, quote, Sue Rydell was deployed to crisscross the dusty gravel roads of northeast Iowa in search of the perfect example of agricultural eye candy for the silver screen. As she crested a hill on Lansing Road, just a few miles northeast of Dyersville, she spied her holy grail, a white, clapboard, two-story farmhouse nestled against the hillside, a red barn tilted nearby. Plenty of cornfields embraced the little scene to frame key camera angles. End quote. From Wendell Jarvis.
We stopped the car. Brian Frankish and Phil and I got out and scouted the location, then finally went up and knocked on the door of the owner of the house, Don Lansing. Now, part of the ball field is built on another farm owned by Al Amescamp, Al and Rita Amescamp. So we had to work with both of those farmsteads to do the movie, because we had to build the ball field right there on both property lands.
It would have been easier to simply place the entire field on Don Lansing's land. But Phil Alden Robinson saw the perfect spot for light, for ambiance, and that meant crossing property lines. And it meant tearing down and later reinstalling a power line, which cost, according to Brian Frankish, $47,000. And later, when people started to come to the actual field, the property split caused other problems. But for now, they had a farmhouse and a farm in Iowa. The crew and cast had flown in. They were ready to go. Except they had no corn. From Timothy Busfield.
Brian is the hero of the movie, actually. We wouldn't have the movie if it wasn't for Brian, because Brian was the producer who insured the corn. And had he not insured the corn, then we never would have been able to make the movie. And it never would have been made because there was no corn.
In the category of things a movie audience never thinks about, you can insert the growing of corn. Writer-director Phil Alden Robinson and production manager Brian Frankish got what they wanted, to shoot their film in Iowa. This is the late 1980s, a time before CGI. There are things you can do, but in a lot of ways, you're captive to the environment. And in Dyersville, Iowa, in the spring of 1988, it was cold and the ground was frozen. They had to wait until late in the spring to plant their corn. And for corn to grow, it needs one critical element: water. From production manager Brian Frankish.
And first a rainstorm was supposed to come through, passed us by. Then another one was supposed to come through, passed us by. And all of a sudden, within like 3 weeks, we were in the midst of a drought.
According to ESPN writer Jeff Marin, during the shooting of Field of Dreams, Iowa was, quote, suffering through its worst drought since the Dust Bowl years of the 1930s, end quote. But even before everyone else began to see the warning signs, Brian Frankish did what great production managers do. They think outside the box, and they think ahead.
In every motion picture insurance policy, there are things that you can insure. If any one of these things got sick or got hurt or so on and so forth and caused us to slow down, we were insured. So when we were putting together the insurance policy, I got this idea. I said, what's one of the most important performers I have on screen in this film? And I said, it's the corn.
Yeah.
And I went, no corn, no movie. So I called the insurance company and I said, what'll it cost to put a rider on the corn? And at the same time, they turned to me and said, look, you're also casting Burt Lancaster. We have a problem with that. We're going to require an additional insurance policy for Burt Lancaster. Called him Burt. He was furious.
So it was because of health that he needed?
Yeah, I mean, he was, okay. I mean, you know, at the time we were shooting the picture, he was in his late 70s, or he was in his mid 70s at least. I had a special policy that insured both Burt Lancaster and the corn in the film. And when all of a sudden the rain was not coming, when I was wandering around the other farms in Iowa, I noticed the complete absence of irrigation. Why don't you people water your corn if you have a problem here? And they said, this is Iowa. We believe in the Lord. Okay, that's fine with me. But I'm glad I had an insurance policy.
As a safety measure, production designer Dennis Gassner went out and purchased not some, not most, but every piece of existing fake silk corn, 50,000 stalks from South Korea. In the meantime, with the help of Wendell Jarvis in the Iowa Film Office and Eldon Trump, the set's farm advisor, Brian Frankish was able to get enough equipment and water to irrigate the corn. But they still had to wait, which cost them extra days of shooting near the end. But for these extra costs and all the equipment and water, Brian Frankish sent the insurance company the bill. How much?
At the end of the day, I picked up like $350,000 from the insurance company.
With inflation, in today's money, that's nearly $1 million.
Once we put the water on that corn, it was growing up. I mean, you could hear it grow. It was growing so fast. We had the only corn in that section of Iowa that year, as a matter of fact. It was quite a feat. It was really quite interesting. I mean, John Lindley would look at me and he would go, "Wow, Frankish, what are you doing here?" Because we really pulled it off.
They did such a good job, in fact, that the corn grew too tall.
The corn was growing so tall in the field so fast, because that's what corn does. You kind of fix things or that you would never expect.
This is Van Ling.
Hey, Ben.
Hi, Ben. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Van Ling is a visual effects specialist and producer who wrote and directed the Field of Dreams documentary titled Field of Dreams: A Scrapbook, which came out in 1998. One of Ling's main areas of focus in the documentary was to highlight examples of movie-making craft. Like, what do you do when the corn grows feet taller than the leading man?
The corn was growing so tall that, between, one day and the next, they had to put Kevin Costner on boxes to raise him up so that it had the same continuity of cornstalk height as what they shot the previous day. You can't believe how hard it is to make movies.
Ling, who had been the visual effects supervisor for some of the biggest films in Hollywood, including Twister, Terminator 2, Dante's Peak, and Titanic, was not a huge baseball fan, which is the reason he took on this project of putting together a documentary and DVD in 1998, because he understood the power of a film to draw you in and connect you to other worlds.
I understand baseball, but when I was a kid, I was terrified of getting beamed. So I would never even try to catch it. I would just wait until it bounced and then, which of course, defeats the purpose. But when we had a chance to do Field of Dreams, I thought it was fantastic because I like the movie. I want to, do the kind of deep dive, if possible, that I was able to do for Terminator 2 and The Abyss and a number of other things since then that will give people more of an insight other than just, hey, this is a movie for baseball people. And yes, it's a story about fathers and sons, but, let's focus on all the baseball aspects of it. And it really wasn't about that at all for me. For me, it was about let me learn the journey of what baseball means to people. And hopefully I'll be able to get that across so that somebody who enjoys how films are made, how emotional films are made, can say, oh, I've heard the Field of Dreams disc is really good, not only because of the movie, but because of the underlying thing. That's kind of what I was hoping for.
For Van Ling, a storyteller in so many different ways, there are two seemingly contradictory goals at the heart of his work. First, he wants to create a visual world that audiences fall into completely and wholeheartedly. And second, he wants to disclose his secrets in order to grow an audience's appreciation for what was initially done to them.
There's so much of an art in making movies that people kind of forget, because part of our job is to make it look like we just took a camera out and shot it exactly the way it was. Field of Dreams was one of those films where it looks exactly like what it's supposed to be, and it's something recognizable and relatable, yet the journey to make it is this wild ride.
Mhm.
And I think it helps make people realize just how hard it is sometimes and how challenging it is and how artistic filmmakers are in having to make something look completely simple and not complicated and very, relatable, that you could have gone down there and shot this.
I know in this episode I'm exposing the magic tricks and revealing the truth behind the illusions. But like Van Ling, I think these kinds of discoveries are just as interesting as the illusion. That if you're watching the film and you see Kevin Costner standing in the corn, you know, oh, he's probably standing on a box or a platform. And when you're looking at the grass on the field, you know, it's actually painted green and would otherwise be brown. Also, according to Wendell Jarvis, they painted the corn because it wasn't quite green enough at the end of the day. Just like baseball and the game within the game, here there's the story within the story. And when you watch the film again with this added knowledge, you can't help but see things in a different light. For me, once I stepped behind the curtain, I wanted to know all the secrets. For instance, here's another question you probably didn't ask yourself while watching the film. This is a farm in Iowa. So where are the sounds of farm animals? Well, according to sound engineer Russell Williams, there were plenty of animal sounds, especially at night.
I spent 2 or 3 evenings out in the cornfield at night, just getting the night music of the insects and that sort of thing. So
Like you would
that
record it, you mean? Or
recorded,
just listen?
just
Okay.
reel after reel of that stuff. And there were some interesting challenges also when we worked at night, because when you look at the image of what's going on, you don't see anything that would be a sound problem on the screen. But adjacent to the farm we were using, there were certain breeds of livestock, and kind of like human beings in the middle of the night, they've got their thing going on and they're making noise. And so that wouldn't fit with the dialogue that Ray Liotta and Kevin Costner and other baseball players were performing. So a lot, I don't know about most, but I would say a fair amount of the night scenes in Field of Dreams are re-recorded because of this livestock noise.
The most physically painful moment for Williams occurred during a road trip scene in the van.
When James Earl and Kevin are driving in the van, and they pick up Frank Whaley on the side of the road. So because we did that as like a continuous shot, so I'm already in the van, laying on the floor in the back. So I'm back there with the recorder, and Kevin pulls up, and they have a little chit chat. So when Frank gets in the van, he's got this bag of baseballs and bats that he tosses first. Then he gets in. Well, he tosses those right on me, and then we continue to drive off. So that's one of those days I said, well, look, Russell, you said you wanted to be in show business. So, sometimes.
Where you're padding.
Yeah. So.
But the most difficult scene, according to Williams, was a scene that, to the audience, probably looked like the easiest to shoot.
And that's when Kevin has kind of said, so long to the baseball players, because Amy has said, Ray, dinner. And they kind of tease him. And then he comes back and he hears the voice again. And he's now by himself. And then he's kind of looking around and he's like, who's paying? Who's paying? What paying? When we do that shot, there are easily 15 people walking around him behind the Steadicam. So you have one problem in that there's only one person that's on the shot. So how about this cattle drive of footsteps? So that's my first challenge. So as we were able to solve that, first the Steadicam operator agreed to take his shoes off. And he's got the most weight on his shoulders. So if he takes his shoes off, that means everybody else is up for grabs. So then Phil said, okay, everybody else will take our shoes off. So we all did that in stocking feet. Back then, I was like, okay, well, since I came up through the documentary world, I did that shot myself. I basically had the recorder around my neck and the boom. So I'm one of the cattle drive people that's working around Kevin. And Kevin, being the astute actor that he is, when you go back and see that little shot, he shuffles his feet as he's like, looking around for an answer to the ghost question to help camouflage some of the footfall, even with all of us in stocking feet. You know what I'm saying? It's still 15 people going around.
Yeah.
And then he eventually walks off towards the house and he throws a baseball down. That turned out to be probably the most challenging shot.
Another moment in the film that audiences enjoyed but probably didn't think too much about was a scene involving Timothy Busfield putting himself at great risk, all in the service of the story.
I let Phil Robinson talk me into a stunt, and I didn't realize until afterwards that he had talked me into it and made me commit to it, because it would probably been illegal for him to do it. It was so dangerous. There's a moment in the movie where I walk in front of home plate and the ball goes and the bat swings and I, say hi. And John Lindley and Phil were sort of, Phil said, come over, Timmy, come here, scratching his chin. Like, we were thinking maybe there was something around home plate, or you're kind of walking here. And I was like, hey, I play baseball. I'll tell you what, why don't I walk in front of home and he'll swing and he'll throw it. And Phil goes, that's a great idea. And I looked at him and I go, you bastard, you knew exactly what you wanted me to do. I could see it. And he smiled real big. So we tried one and it went well. I did it. I walked by, I didn't say the hi yet, but I walked by home plate and the bat swang. And he was a minor league pitcher that had played for Tommy Lasorda in the minor leagues, this guy. They said, let's do one more. And so we did another one, and I got a little creeped out, and I still didn't have the high on the end of it. And then Phil comes over, calls me over, and he says, look, here's the problem. When we are panning with you, by the time we get to the pitcher, he's already in his motion. We want to see him do his whole motion. And I was like, you're kidding me. That's going to make it so compressed. The chances of my getting hit in the side of the head are so good with that. So I ran out to the pitcher and I said, rock and fire. Just when you see me about right here, just rock and fire and I'll trust. And that take, I shimmied and the crew laughed because they knew it was a fairly dangerous stunt. And I think it was the next take that I asked Phil if I could add the high. I felt like it would need a button. For somebody who didn't see the ball players, I couldn't have done that had I not played as much baseball as I did. I never could have done that stunt. I never would have trusted the pitcher. I never would have been able to gauge where the bat was. Most people that would never have been okay with a bat and ball coming right at them if they hadn't spent, years and years and years, around those pieces of equipment.
If you think this show's worth $1, please donate at the website midnightlibraryofbaseball.com or through Podbean. You can also leave a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast. Okay, back to the show. Around the same time, Timothy Busfield put his life in danger by walking in front of a speeding pitch. Something else happened that the audience couldn't see. When Burt Lancaster crosses the barrier after Karen falls off the bleachers, they had to pause so Gabby Hoffman's stunt double could come in. And then they put this big pad under the stunt double's shirt because, according to Tim Busfield, Burt Lancaster slapped the hell out of that stunt double. And then they would pause and bring Gabby Hoffman back and proceed. There were a lot of hard moments on the set, a lot of fun moments. But for director Phil Alden Robinson, who'd already been struggling with anxiety and depression, the things that went wrong stayed with him.
That's a year and a half at least of a lot of 18, even in pre-production, you're working 16 hours a day. It's tricky. Your job is to focus on the fine points of everything at a very granular level, but also to keep your eye on the big picture, on the storytelling, on the themes. And it's hard because you can get really bogged down in the minutiae. And yet when you're talking to the actor, that actor's job is not to be thinking about the big picture and other things. Their job is to think about that character and what they're doing at that moment.
I asked Dwyer some of those questions. He's like, well, they didn't tell us anything. They don't tell the actors because they don't want them to panic or worry about things. So
Yeah.
that's, you have all this information that doesn't get passed down to the cast.
That's true. You try to keep it from them. I don't think I was successful in keeping my angst from them. By the end of the shoot, I think they all knew I was just miserable, and that's wrong. I should not have let them know. But I was just such a pill. I was depressed, and I remember John Lindley, who's the cinematographer and my dear friend, said to me one day, "You got to cheer up." And I said, I feel like I just have enough energy to either do my job or pretend I'm enjoying it, but I can't do both. And he said, nobody wants to hear that from you. And I appreciated the fact that he said that. I needed to hear that. So I try to sort of make a little more of an effort to look like everything was going well, but I don't think I was a good enough actor to really pull it off.
In reality, there was so much going wrong as well, right? Like the drought and just
Right.
the issues and with the grass, with the corn, so many
Absolutely
problems.
right. And every night at Dailies, I'd come home and thinking, it's not what I had in my head.
Mhm.
Now, the interesting thing is, and I've thought about this a lot, what I had in my head was a much more impressionistic approach and a more expressive use of the camera that I realized I just didn't know how to do. And in retrospect, I'm glad I didn't, because I think that the film probably benefits from this very simple directorial approach, that you don't feel that the camera is misleading you to believe in something. It's like it's very matter of fact in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think if I'd put on film what I had in my head, it might not have been as effective.
Yeah, it would have felt more like fantasy instead of like this is a
Right.
real world where these things are happening.
Right. It would have felt more manipulative, I think. And one mantra that I had for myself was, what would this look like if it really happened? And so I was always trying not to be fantastic, and otherworldly. So I think that held me in good stead.
It's amazing how an experience can be so absolutely different depending on where you're standing. Because while Phil Alden Robinson was struggling with the daily crises and general shooting woes, others were having a grand old time, simply standing around. From Charles Hoyes.
We're now in Iowa, and all we're doing is playing baseball for a couple of weeks. We're just playing baseball while they're shooting the other stuff. We're just getting used to being around one another, being a team. We're playing baseball, and we're playing cards in Ray's room.
Ray being Ray Liotta. And others, like Timothy Busfield, used the downtime to cheer up Phil Alden Robinson and other cast and crew.
So we would spend all kinds of time just hanging out. It was just a great experience for me. And I was comic relief for Phil. So he liked my Burt Lancaster. James Earl Jones liked my Burt Lancaster. Burt liked my Burt Lancaster. But I would do Burt Lancaster while we were like doing the scene almost. It was really sort of inappropriate. But I remember James Earl Jones facing me when Gabby Hoffman comes off the bleachers onto the ground, and Burt comes, Frank Whaley comes, then Burt comes and bangs her on the back of her, on her back so hard, by the way. He hit her so hard, that little stunt girl or the double. But I was behind him, and Jimmy was directly across next to Amy. And so while Burt was on the ground, I was looking at James and going, hot dog stuck in the throat. Child's got a hot dog, choking to death. I would do that, and his belly would just, you know, he would just shake his head and tell me to stop. And I'd go over to the bleachers and, you know, hot dog, child's choking to death. Hot dog stuck in the throat.
There are more stories to come on location and more magic to share. But first, we'll hear some reflections and memories from Van Ling, who wrote and directed the 1998 documentary Field of Dreams, a scrapbook.
I understand baseball. I'm not an avid sports person in general, but I understood it. I played it in school growing up. And when I say play it, I mean because I was not athletic, I would always get that one position left out, which is where they just, oh, okay, you guys can catch. The people can't catch. Put them way out in the outfield. Because I never played catch with my dad. He was very athletic, but he was more into ping pong and tennis. I was able to play the sports that he played a few times, but I sucked at them. But because he was also a computer engineer, and so we could bond over those kind of things. I think that he came to understand some of the things that I was doing from the standpoint of what he used to do, and I really came to respect all the kind of athletic things that he did. I had the honor of having, not only Phil Robinson and John Lindley and Timothy Busfield, but to have James Earl Jones come into my office to do an interview for this film is really kind of, to me, it's a testament of how much all of these performers and crew loved this movie. It's one of those movies that they're not only proud to have worked on it, but they're proud to when they see it. It's not just, at least I got a paycheck out of it. This is one of those things where it was like a lot of films, it's a labor of love, but it paid off, because there's almost nobody that they could talk to and say, oh yeah, I worked on Field of Dreams, without getting a smile from somebody who goes, oh man, I love that movie. That kind of response. And I think this is one of those rare ones, because it is a gentle movie. It's emotional and it pulls on the heartstrings, but it's a gentle movie. It doesn't require high crime, drastic, story changes and surprises and twists. Those twists are gentle, but they're inevitable. But you don't see them. And that's what's brilliant. The thing is, a lot of baseball movies are about the game, which means that they are a lot about rules and technicalities and how you can strategize and be smart and how you deploy certain things it's like, this movie is not even about the game as much as it is about the emotions and how the game promotes those emotions when you look at it in a certain way, which is as simple as playing catch with your parent, or watching a game with your parent and have them be able to say, see, this is what's happening here. They have to do this and this and this, and you learn at the foot of somebody else who loves the game. And that's how, you get your kids interested in some of the things that you are interested in. They're not just, oh, it's an exercise, or, oh, it's just, it helps your imagination. It's something where you can find common ground, because it means that a parent can show their kids, I used to be young like you, and I could see things like you see them. So, being able to address regrets, I'd like to think that the film caused a lot of heart-to-heart discussions between a lot of parents and their children. It's something I was very proud to be involved in.
Thanks, Van, for sharing your story. Phil Alden Robinson made it through to the other end, and later we'll hear some of the lessons he learned from this experience. And next episode, we'll hear more stories from Iowa and the shooting of what is still known as Shoeless Joe, including Dwyer Brown's initial 3-day shoot, turning into many weeks that he would never forget. And also, I'll unveil how they managed to stage this final amazing scene, with the endless stream of cars stretching into the darkness.
How are we going to get people there? We had to arrange for all those people and all those cars. We had to figure out how to do it. How do we get them there? I had done a film called King Kong, and we had this big end scene, and we tried to figure out how could we get a free audience out of this. So we took out a full-page ad in the LA Times and said, "Come see King Kong," with a little cutout down the bottom. It says, "Cut out this form and write for tickets, mail them to us." Well, it worked like a charm. So I said, look, I had this experience on King Kong with a newspaper ad. Why don't we do it? Why don't we do this for Shoeless Joe? Come be in the last shot of Shoeless Joe. Described what it was, write for tickets. And they sent they cut out the little things, they sent in the tickets. And in the middle of nowhere, we ended up with close to 6,000 people, 6,000 cars.
Next time on the Midnight Library of Baseball presents The Making of Field of Dreams. The show is produced and edited by me, Ben Orlando. Music by Sergei Papkin and Ashot Danielyan. Good night.